Hello, my name is Aaron Keith, and I am the host of Wise Wise. I am playing the part of you guys out there, your perspective, as I am the one asking the questions, pulling the information out of Alexander so that we can all easily understand and use this in our lives to better our relationships with ourselves, others, on our path towards wellness. So how did I get here? Well, I was born in Norwich, Connecticut, and I was brought up Catholic. And I kind of took on a fear-based perception of the world from that. And I basically felt restricted, and I felt like I wasn't able to really feel free. So then, a few years later, when I was around 20, I was introduced to Sylvia Browne. I was given one of her books, and her perception of life really was a freeing moment for me, where I realized that, maybe all of these religions have it wrong, and maybe it's different than how described. Maybe reincarnation is real, and maybe there is no heaven and hell. Maybe we just go back to the other side where that's our original home. And I took that perspective with me all the way until a few years later when I was introduced to many of the conspiracies of the world. And I know when somebody gets introduced to that, the whole fear-based model comes right back because, you're scared of these few little people that are controlling the world, and you kind of take on a victim mentality again. So here I was with my Catholic roots coming all back to me, where I was repeating the same cycle. And so this outlook on life made me want to get closer to the earth, just, live my life with nature. And to me, that was a beautiful thing, wanting to get back to that, because that was something real. All these conspiracies out there I couldn't prove or disprove, but nature was real to me, and it spoke to me. So luckily, at the time, I was working as a web developer in Boston, and my boss allowed me to go anywhere I wanted to in the world as long as I had an internet connection. So I was able to just pack up my bags and go wherever I wanted to, and somehow Virginia made it on the list. And that's where I've currently settled down. But it was there when I started building a website with this conspiracy view in mind, where I was going to be sharing these articles where, to me, I looked at them as like truth, and I had to get this truth out there. And it wasn't until I was watching a video from David Wilcock where he was preaching love is the answer. Love heals all. Fear is just a distraction. And that's when I really looked at what I was doing. I had put a year and a half of designing and building this website, and I was able to turn around and look at that and be like, I no longer can do this because it no longer resonates with me. So after that, I had been in a relationship, and we had some struggles, and we went through some counseling. And that was really the first time I had looked at myself for self-growth in the roles I was playing in my relationships. And for some reason, it really appealed to me. Like, I became almost addicted, and I began to seek out what was the way. There were so many self-help books out there, so many ways, so many philosophies, but none of them really felt complete to me. They all kind of covered one aspect of things. One that I really enjoyed was The Power of Now. And I really, really enjoyed that book and enjoyed thinking about all the concepts in it. But I still felt like it was not complete. My journey was not complete. It was through some chance circumstances that I ended up at one of Alexander's sound journeys. And after his sound journey, he would have a session where we would all get some food and just talk about his frequency-based philosophy. And he would give his perceptions, kind of like what you guys are hearing on this podcast. And it was there that I just became hungrier for this information, because all the questions I was having at the time, he was able to answer in a way that really resonated with me at a really deep level. And through all of our talks, spending a lot of time with each other, we became friends, and then this podcast became a reality. So why do I think this is really important for people to listen to? Well, the biggest conspiracy is not external, it's internal. And we have been led to believe different. And once we have those keys, everything is unlocked. And I feel like this podcast goes that step into giving you the keys to your life back.
Hi, this is Alexander, and I'd like to thank you and welcome you to this podcast on this frequency-based philosophy that I've been working on for 19 or 20 years. And in this podcast, we will be covering subjects such as emotional release, conscious communication, self-growth, and environmental awareness, and how all these subjects help us to work toward a more conscious way of living and to focus on wellness as we go through our day-to-day practices in a very practical way. And how did I get into this this field? Well, it all began back when I was born and raised in the Triad area of North Carolina, and I've lived here pretty much my whole life. First got into the band scene in my early 20s. And so I was a musician and traveled around, and that was my dream and my career. And I was very passion-driven, very goal-oriented, and I accomplished a lot of things in a few years. Little did I realize, but this was my introduction into studying relationships. Being in a group of sensitive artists and learning to keep the peace and to be able to be productive and to move along a project. This has developed into quite a study of over 20 years, like I've said. And then around 30 or 31 years old, I just kind of got a feeling a shift happened, and I wanted to use music and sound to help people rather than just entertain them. And at this point, simultaneously, I had a few years earlier started studying subtle energy and paying attention to the subtleties of the senses and getting more into nature-based living and bringing more and more organic products in to stay focused, like I said, around natural vibrations. Then in my mid-30s, I attended a sound healing school in San Francisco, California, and studied both with shamans and scientists. All of this led me into a direction that I really had no idea where I was going. I was kind of going into the unknown, and I didn't really have anyone to share this path with except for my wife at the time, and she was very supportive. And simultaneously, she was battling cancer while I was studying this healing art of sound. We learned some information of how sound can really affect and destroy cancer very quickly. And it was hard to receive some of this information and know that I was limited in how I could help my loved one with that. But I worked really hard to stay out of any kind of conspiracy thinking or negativity, and we just worked with it the best we could. And 10 months later, she passed. And in her passing, it took me into a completely different state than I had ever been in before. And what I call it now is it flipped my polarity. And I went from being the most centered and grounded masculine energy to an empathic, extremely intuitive, sensitive being. Now things that other people couldn't even see, or situations that other people couldn't see, were excruciatingly painful for me. I went through about 5 years of excruciating chest pain and tried through dietary approaches and many different holistic approaches to learn to manage this. I did choose to stay away from pharmaceuticals and endured a lot of pain while going through this. But what it led me to realize is how our emotional body is so painful. And it made me sympathize for people that have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and different diagnoses that really doesn't explain where their discomfort or their pain's coming from. And so at that point, I started working on all the subtleties of the emotional field and started getting great results. But it was so subtle that it was difficult to explain to anybody. So now, over 9 years of working with this, both professionally and personally, when we are working with our subtle energies, of course, our thoughts are connected to that. There's many levels that are connected to that subtle energy field. But our emotions and our thoughts are definitely triggers to this. And emotional or energetic pain can feel very, very physical. And I know this from direct experience, and this gives me insight with diagnoses such as PTSD and this flipping of the polarity, and we will cover some of this in all of this work. But it breaks down to a simple equation that I have, that the way that I focus on wellness, and that we'll be talking about throughout the duration of this podcast, and that is breaking a discomfort down, that what some may call a disease or a dis-ease, viewing that as the frequency has just gotten out of its natural state, so it creates friction or it creates discomfort. And I had a wonderful teacher to tell me one time that we shouldn't run from pain. It's our greatest teacher, and it helps us. But when we run from it, it costs us. So understanding that physical or mental dis-ease many times stems from a disruption in the energetic field or the aura. And these disruptions normally come from or stem from either suppression of emotions or an over-exaggeration of expression of these emotions. And those experiences really drain our energy field, whether we are stuffing those emotions or we're just flying off the handle and experiencing those emotions over and over daily. Both ways drain. There is a proper way to have what I call emotional processing, and the release of these emotions in a healthy way can be very beneficial for overall health of the body, and we'll continue to dig deeper into those subjects. So the weakened field comes from that suppression or that over-exaggeration. So where do these emotions come from? Well, this is what really started tweaking my interest many years ago. And I shifted my focus from just a subtle energy study to study relationships. And that seemed to be where all of these emotions were stemming from, this failure to communicate in our relationships. This, of course, begins back in our childhood with our parents, and we carry these patterns on. So here we are many, many years later, almost 20 years, and I've brought some planetary influences that I use as tools. And all of this is based off of mathematical equations. I'm here to help people to see the subtle energy as a very real substance, and to give a very grounded view and even a musical view of communication, wellness, emotional release, and how all of these fit together, and how all of our relationships are playing a role for us to help us to learn. So I look forward to sharing all of this information. I'm open to any questions that any of you beautiful people may have, and we'll do our best to have segments to where we answer direct questions that you guys send in. So thank you so much for your support, and I look forward to enjoying this process with all of you people, Aaron and myself.